Afternoon, after a torrential morning and a calm afternoon. So we are here to talk about Beyond Silicon Valley Innovation, or at least that's the title of it. I'm Zachary Karabell. I'm the head of global strategy at Envestnet. And to my far right is Marco Annunziato from GE, chief economist and head of market insights. Next to him is Sean Belka from Fidelity Investments, who heads up Fidelity Labs, which is their kind of innovation and development arm. On the other side of the table, Jim McCarthy from Visa, I think head of innovation and strategic partnerships. And next to him is Ken Washington, who's vice president of research and from Ford Motor for the past 15 months or thereabouts. So just to frame this discussion, clearly being here at Techonomy, the heart of Silicon Valley, a lot of the way in which American culture now thinks about innovation is thinking about it in the new startup with a great idea that's funded by somebody on Sand Hill Road or funded by some hope and dream and becomes this disruptive force. Obviously something like Uber being a prime example of that. But as we also know, and as Secretary Pritzker indicated earlier, a huge portion of actual change and research and new ideas comes out of existing large organizations, very few of which are present in Silicon Valley. I mean, Visa is definitely part of this ecosystem, Hewlett-Packard, but I mean, in general, a lot of the change and money and pushing new services and products and ideas and ways of doing things to consumers and to other businesses comes from large businesses. And part of the point of this panel is to explore, is there a different way that that happens than this usually conceived of, person with a great idea who comes up with some money and changes the world? And what does that mean? And what does it mean to do that within a larger organization that has an existing business? We don't want, if you've got a great new way of doing things, you don't want to destroy, you don't want to blow up the house you're in and then build a new house. You have to balance the house you're living in and all of its needs with potential change in the future. And all of these gentlemen, I think, are acutely aware of that. And then the other, which we'll get to during the conversation, is what business are you in? And how does that shape what decisions you're going to make about innovation and change? So I think with that, we're going to start with Marco, who has both a dual position as being aware of what's going on in GE, but has also come out of being at the IMF and government, and also, as part of your mandate, looks at what's going on globally, as well as, of course, what's going on within GE, which is itself a global conglomerate, and all these businesses are global. So maybe you can give us a thumbnail of how you see change happening both in the kind of industrial global business landscape and within GE as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So let me give you a few thoughts on this, because we're in a world which is changing dramatically both for companies and for countries. So whether you take the industry look or the country look, the changes that we're seeing are dramatic. On the first point you raised, which is how do big established companies move forward with innovation? You look at GE, we're a case in point. We've always thrived on innovation, in-house innovation. And we have well-established lines of businesses for the last 140 years. However, we also realize that now innovation is moving so fast that disruption will happen. So you don't even have to think about disrupting yourself. You have to look at where the disruption is coming and realize that unless you get ahead of it, the disruption will take you out of the game. So how do we react to this? We react to this by, first of all, trying to build ecosystems. So we realize that as a large company, we have advantages and disadvantages. We have areas of competence and areas where we lack expertise. And we spend an enormous amount of effort today building partnerships both with other large companies, but also with startups. So we've opened the software center in Silicon Valley, which has become the hub of GE Digital, a new division of GE. We've opened a venture capital office in Menlo Park. So we try to have a closer relationship with smaller companies, realizing that they bring to the table different expertise and a different dynamism, but also realizing that as a large company, we have an enormous advantage, which is the capability capability of scaling innovation more rapidly. And scaling innovation is as important as coming up with innovation in the first place. Second thing we do is we try to change the internal culture. We're moving towards a new world of digital industrial innovation, which means even industrial companies which work in traditional sectors like building jet engines or gas turbines have to move faster. So we're changing the internal culture. And the third thing, which brings me to the other element you noted, which is the global element of this. We do innovation on a global basis in different ways. So we have research and development centers across the world, not just in the US, but in China, in India, in Turkey, in Brazil. And a lot of the innovations that we are coming up with are developed in some of these different locations, in some cases in conjunction with local scientists and local companies. And what this gives you is a completely different perspective, because you have engineers and scientists living in China or India with a much better understanding of the local needs and the local conditions, and therefore the ability to come up with innovation, with new products in healthcare, for example, which are cheaper, they're smaller, they're simpler, they don't depend on 100% reliable electricity, and can bring more reliable healthcare into these countries. And these are innovations which you can then reverse engineer and bring back in developed countries. The last point I will make is, to the point of ecosystems and collaboration, it's also learning how to tap the potential of people who are not linked to your company, either as being employees or as other companies you work with. So crowdsourcing. We've started experimenting with crowdsourcing. It's given us some remarkable successes, but it's also opened our mind to the potential that innovation has of moving faster once you tap resources outside your four walls, but also how complicated it is and the kind of stress and difficulty it brings to the organization. So let me stop here for the moment.
So I'm going to skip over Sean and Jim, because you two are more in the technology and finance. Ken, coming out of, you had a career at Lockheed, you've had careers before that, you're at Ford now, probably more organically in common with the GE in terms of a large industrial company that makes complicated, somewhat expensive, big products. So how do you see all of this playing out in the particular landscape you're in now?
I think your observation is correct. We do make similar complicated devices. But let me start by saying I love the title of the panel, because Beyond Silicon Valley, I think, says it all, because we really believe that there's some magic that's here in Silicon Valley. And like many other companies, we've stood up a presence here to really plug into the environment, to be part of this ecosystem, to build the relationships that can only be built if you really have a presence here and you really take it seriously and you invest in it and you turn it into an important part of your business. But the beyond part is really instrumental, because for us, it's not just about plugging into the valley and then doing something interesting and cool here. It's about making it relevant for the entire business of the company. And so for us, the Silicon Valley presence is thought of, we think of it as an accelerator for our focus on innovating in every part of our business. We think of it as a foot in today, which is our cars, trucks, and utilities that we build today, that people love all over the world, and a foot in tomorrow in terms of how do we invent the future of how people want to be mobile, how you want to move. So being beyond Silicon Valley means finding a way to leverage the insight and the culture and the ability to move fast and to question tradition, to take risks, but to do it smartly in a way that can reinvent your core product, but can also bring you forward and kind of pull you into the future. And that's what we're trying to do with our presence here in the Valley, but also what we're trying to do with our global presence of creating products that people love. And I think the key for businesses today, both large and small and everybody in between, is to figure out how do you create that ability to drive innovation across your entire ecosystem. Because I think if you don't do that, you're going to find that you just have little pockets of innovation that don't impact your business across your entire product lineup. And I think that would be a mistake. And so that's what we're doing with our innovation ecosystem here. And that's what we're trying to do with our technology and our drive to innovate across all aspects of our business. And I'll talk later about some of the things we're doing with trying to create new ways to move with what we call smart mobility.
And if any company should have a drive to innovate, it's a car company.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. You know what? I think I asked the question earlier this week about the fact that this feels like such a special time in the future of technology.
But that's an interesting question in terms of Ford, right? I mean, is Ford a car company?
We think of ourselves as a car, truck, utility company and a mobility company. And the "and" is important because as a mobility company, we need to learn and embrace how to create new ways of being mobile, which include tapping into the digital system that we all use in our daily lives. It includes leveraging connected car. It includes enabling new ways to get from point A to point B, even if you don't own a car. So we're doing some experimentation in our project we call Smart Mobility with helping you experiment with how to do a car on demand, how to identify parking spaces using sensors that are on a car, how to autonomously operate a vehicle from afar. We're doing some pretty far-reaching things to learn how to be mobile differently.
I mean, do you ever sit around, is there like a late night moment of speculating, could you imagine a period of time, 20, 30 years in the future, where Ford doesn't make cars?
I think people will vote with their feet on that question, right? If you love to drive, you're going to drive, right? And if you want to drive because you live away from a large city, I think it's going to be really hard not to own a car. And so we're putting our bets on having a portfolio of a full class of vehicles that people will want to drive, as well as solutions, mobility solutions that people want to use that fit their lifestyle. And that may be cars on demand, that might be an autonomous ride service, that might be a combination of using a bike and public transportation and bus and a van pool service. I think people are going to tell us what experience they want. And it's our job to listen to that and react to it and be agile. And to do that, you need a Silicon Valley mindset. And you need to have that mindset embedded all across your company because it's not going to be stagnant. It's going to be dynamic.
So Sean, we were talking about this before a little bit with Fidelity, and most of you know, I mean, Fidelity is one of the largest asset management and other firms in the world, $5 trillion in assets. Basically Fidelity and BlackRock and a few others really dominate that space. But 20 years ago, a lot of that would have been in actively managed mutual funds, and now that's less than half of the total business. So that business, while it's still in that general space, has changed. So how do you think about innovation and in your kind of Fidelity Labs, Skunk Work vantage point, what does that look like in this particular world of managing money and services?
Well, I think it's about being mission-focused, not product-focused. So in our case, our mission is to really help customers have great experiences and better outcomes so they can achieve their financial goals, whether that be retirement or their children's education. So products kind of come and go, but that mission remains. And so I think in the context of Beyond Silicon Valley, we've been working with Stanford's D-School since its inception in 06, and they have a phrase there, yes and. So in our case, there's Silicon Valley, and we have an office in San Francisco, but it's also how do we take that and look globally for great ideas and try to really fulfill that mission. And we look at innovation for large corporations as having multiple dimensions. So there's always going to be new product development in the business unit. And so our asset management division is always coming up with new products that they think are really going to help customers get better outcomes. But then we have new companies that we create. We have a venture capital wing. We do some M&A. We create new companies on our own. And so I think that goal is really to say, how do we stay true to the mission, the methods, whether it be products or methods of innovation, how to remain flexible on that, but recognizing that each of those modes of innovation requires different skills. So the people doing new product development in a business unit are not doing a new co, and so they shouldn't think that. But if we're doing something new and different, and we need to have the right skills and focus for that. And so our goal is really to just focus fully on the mission. The other things are really more the methods to get there.
And so at Visa, right? Visa may be one of the largest companies by market cap in the world with the smallest number of employees relative to it. I mean, it's $150, $60 billion market cap.
Close to 190. Yeah.
190. I mean, that extra 10, 20 billion is it's like a rounding error when you're at Visa. But only 10,000 people, you said, who are producing that. If only Walmart could do that, it would be a $27 trillion company. So how do you think about, what is the business in this case? You remarked before, you used to tell people casually, I work at Visa, and they would say, oh, that's the credit card company, and you would rightly point out that that's actually not true. But then what is the core of what Visa is generating $190 billion of market?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's really funny because most people do think of us as the physical device we all carry around. But in effect, Visa's network, actually, you could argue we were one of the first platform to service companies before that was a definition, if you will. And historically, the company itself was grounded on, I think, a very powerful idea that it kind of has taken root here in the Valley, which was effectively an innovation that the founder, Dee Hock, convinced Bank of America to open up what was a closed-loop network and create the Visa network. So today, those 10,000 employees effectively run the network that connects the cards to traditionally wired line devices, reliable electricity, et cetera. And so when you think of, or at least the way we think about the business is, while we've grown from one issuer in one market to today over 14,000 clients that sit on either side of us in over 200 markets, we're only scratching the surface because the device that effectively has driven us to this point has been an analog device. And so the opportunity writ large is really all these digital devices. And so the edge of our network is going to increase beyond financial institutions in those markets to be in discussions with 14 auto manufacturers, to companies like Fidelity, to companies like GE when you think about the Internet of Things. And the question isn't really about payment, but it's commerce. And so we actually get significantly more leverage when we look to the future with respect to how do we extend what has been effectively a proprietary network into these digital devices. And so we're making the leap into effectively an API-driven web services business, taking that platform and extending it into those devices. But like everyone said, it's all about partnership and collaboration because 10,000 people aren't going to come up with those ideas, and whether it's in Silicon Valley or around the world. It's how do you tap into the billion points, if you will, of IQ that are out there.
So I mean, on this, and I want Sean to also weigh in, and I think both Marco and Ken as well. Innovation's kind of the buzzy word. We're going to do new things. We're going to change. Part of what all of you are also involved in is either acquisitions or partnering, i.e., do we spend money internally to do this? Do we spend R&D money to build up new ideas? Or do we find really interesting people, and do we buy them? The buy versus build. Where do you come out on that in terms of, is it more effective for a larger organization to essentially de facto outsource that and then buy it? Or do you think there's also great virtue in being able to incubate that internally?
Yeah, for us, it's been all about partnerships. As I said, historically, we're not direct to consumer or merchant. The partners that grew the business for the first 50 years were financial institutions, and they're still if you will, the key clients because they do the underwriting of the risk. But what we found was before this function was formed that I manage today, we were really an unknown to the Valley, even though we were headquartered here. Folks like Google, Apple, Facebook, others would come to try to talk to Visa about things we could do together, and there was no one to talk to. We didn't have, if you will, a digital, a willingness to engage. So part of it was that engagement and recognizing that in engaging, we can actually create new experiences that extend the experience and do it in a way that we never would have thought of. So it's all about effectively de-risking the business through those partnerships, and even more so going forward. Through web services, we plan on later this year opening a complete developer center with a copy of VisaNet to allow sandbox access to anybody that wants to come in and create new payments and commerce experiences, because we recognize that while the large platforms are very important from a scale perspective, there's a ton of small businesses that are out there with great ideas, and we won't scale if every one of those has to have a business development relationship.
And by the way, just this is one of these moments where every now and then we all have to stop and just reflect on how unbelievably, dramatically, rapidly the world has evolved. No cell phones and no smartphone before 2008, and the idea that there was no payment system between what we think of as the digital leaders of this new economy and actually being able to do this digitally online until a few years ago, and how quickly that's become ubiquitous. And then Ken, just on the financial, the build-buy part, where do you come out?
Yeah, so if you look at Fidelity historically, it started in Boston in 1946, managing a few funds, and that division has grown nicely, and so that's now $2 trillion, from a standing start. But the other $3 trillion are all startups that we created de novo, no M&A. So our 401k division, brokerage, institutions. So I think in our case, it's been pretty much around new product development, around the core, and then creating new companies that really were in adjacent spaces but really satisfied customer need. Again, back to the mission focus, each of those things took the same mission and just augmented what we were already doing.
Well, I was really excited about being on this panel with a couple of guys from the finance community, because if you think about automobiles in your car or your truck, it's, for most people, it's the second most significant purchase you make. And with the digitalization of money, it's opening up new options and new opportunities for how we might collaborate with the financial community. And it's no longer just about that that first upfront transaction when you go into a dealer and you go to buy your car, and then 7 to 10 years later you go back and buy another car. There are all these multiple touch points throughout your life cycle of having this vehicle, that you're interacting with it, and your smartphone that's in the vehicle, and the rest of your digital life, because remember that vehicles are now nothing more than additional complex devices on the Internet of Things. And you can interact with that, and it's creating data that you can do analytics on, and you can have touch points around payment systems and interaction with other suppliers and other vendors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is a really rich opportunity for us to create business value, not only for our company, but value for consumers as they interact with our product. And for that to come to a realization, the partnerships have to be in place, which is why we're really valuing our presence here in the Valley, and also our presence in other technology hotbeds, again, to the title Beyond Silicon Valley, because that presence is giving us access to the companies that we need to build relationships with to begin to build out these new business models that are going to define our business in the future.
You'll be happy to know we've got a half of a Ford Mustang on my floor up in One Market Center.
Awesome.
Hacked to the blockchain.
That's awesome. I mean, seriously though, that's the kind of creative collision that happens in Silicon Valley, and that's the kind of thing that leads to ideation, and those are the kind of experiments we love to see people do, even without any engagement with us, and then later we can come in and make it even richer because we know what the electrical architectures are, we know how our modems work, we know how our dealer system works, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a really exciting time.
Marco?
For me, on the buy it or build it, it really depends on who can build it fastest, because the world is moving so fast. So we've used both strategies. For example, cybersecurity, which for us is essential, because as we make all industrial machines interconnected with the industrial internet, if you don't have solid cybersecurity, you're finished. So we found a top-of-the-line cybersecurity company, WorldTech, and we bought them up. It was the fastest way. They were the fastest at building it, and buying them was the best strategy. Conversely, we've set up this year Current, which is a new company within GE focused on energy. And the idea is the energy space is being disrupted with distributed generation, with consumption, which becomes smart consumption, so consumers also become producers and storers of energy. It's a massive revolution, but within GE, we have people both in technology, in the energy sector, in finance, who understand what's going on, and the space is still completely fluid. So we decided the best thing was to build a new company inside GE and tackle it ourselves, and so grow the business ourselves. So it really depends on where it can be built the fastest.
Yeah, and just following up on Marco's point, so we bought a company called CyberSource a couple of years ago, probably 5 years ago, who was at the time the leader in e-commerce payments, because that was where the market was. The world's moved, again, the whole point about software, and so we just took an investment in Stripe, not because CyberSource isn't so important, but there are new companies that have come along, and it's not a zero-sum game. You got to do both.
So a point that David Kirkpatrick would appreciate, when Fortune magazine was at its sort of mid-20th century heyday, it was writing story after story about how large American companies, from GE to Ford to whatever the precursor, the banks, the Citibanks of the world, were driving the American economy forward, were hotbeds of creativity and dynamism, IBM, and they were lionized. And some of that was a marketing fiction of kind of marketing the American story, but that was where the locus was of people's imagination about creating this Tomorrowland, which we're now inhabiting. And today, of course, it's all Silicon Valley, and that's where it resides. Do any of you, and answer this as tongue-in-cheek, or the questions as tongue-in-cheek, but answer as you will. Any of you ever look around and going, hey, wait a minute, it's great what's going on around here, but we're doing 10 times as much with a much more sophisticated way. How come no one's paying attention to what we're doing?
I think it's more healthy to think of it as an and as opposed to an or. And I can speak to this with some credibility because I've spent 10 years in Silicon Valley before I came to Ford in 2 different stints. And I can tell you there's an awful lot of amazing innovation and technology ideation happening and creative collisions happening here in the Valley with pure tech companies that is pretty amazing. But at the same time, a lot of that technology finds its way in the more complicated and complex products. For example, you can bring any cell phone, smartphone device into a Ford vehicle and plug it in or connect it by Bluetooth, and it just works, right? And that happens because we've collaborated with, the major providers of, cell phone platforms. So there's a lot of creative interactions that happen that make the innovation and the healthy value creation of both, large industrial companies, historical industrial companies, and tech companies here in the Valley that affect our lives because these products are not, they don't live in separate islands. They talk to each other. But and the last point I'd like to make is that, this is the world we live in the automotive business is, not the same world that a lot of people think of when they think of a large car company and maybe even a large company like GE. I think these large companies, and I'll speak for Ford, we've transformed and we're in a period now of driving innovation and growth as opposed to survival, which we were really in survival mode during the economic downturn. And we had to shed a lot of the discretionary spending and we're really trying to just survive. That's no longer the case. We're really driving to create new innovation in our products. We're looking to forge the right relationships and the strategic partnerships with the tech companies. The vehicles today have dozens and dozens of software modules on them that do all kinds of assisted tasks for you that are quite complex and sophisticated. And in the next 5 years, you're going to see that only increase exponentially as the promise of advanced capabilities like autonomous driving becomes a reality. So I think these worlds are colliding, and it's not an either or anymore. It's an and.
And I would not see it as a difference between Silicon Valley and large companies, because the reason why there is this focus on Silicon Valley is the new economic revolution is driven by digital, and digital starts in Silicon Valley. So the focus here is completely justified, and you see companies like GE putting a big foot in Silicon Valley and becoming part of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. So I think there is a convergence of identity between large companies and what you see in Silicon Valley, but what we need to think more about is, given that the new industrial, economic, innovation revolution is digital, it's distributed. Barriers to scale, economies of scale as being redefined not just by the digital revolution, but advanced manufacturing, 3D printing, 4D printing. So we should be paying also more attention to other hotbeds of innovation that you see in other countries around the world. You see them in Israel. You see a vibrant maker movement in Turkey. You see pockets of innovation happening in areas of North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, as these countries try to push to grow their economies and diversify them, bypassing some of the lack of infrastructure, some of the lack of institutions. You see countries like China betting very heavily on digital innovation. So I think the distinction is it large companies or Silicon Valley startups is not the focus anymore. The issue is really where in the world is it happening, how do we connect it, and how do we make sure that the benefits are additive, global, and that this does not degenerate into a divisive competition where protectionism kicks in. You've had a discussion today on
well, let me push back on that and get the others to join in on that, which is maybe so in theory, but the difference between being extremely lean and new is you don't have a massive franchise that you have to support, right? I mean, you can say all you want, we're going to become a mobility company at Ford, but you also have a multi-billion-dollar set of product lines that are important to the ability of Ford to do any of what you're talking about. So how do you balance within a large existing franchise that's income producing, that has a CEO who has to, either respond to shareholders, and I want to get your thoughts in a minute about the difference between public and private companies, because you're the one representative of a very large private company. So how do you balance that within, you don't want to say to your current massive business, oh, by the way, we're just going to disrupt you now?
Yeah, I live this every day because my research team, it's a global research team that supports the entire business. And so we do everything that enables our cars to continue to be fun to drive, but also meet environmental regulations and support all the right modern computer technology and meet all the safety and regulations and requirements. And so we do the core heavy lifting of the technology development for future powertrains, transmissions, materials, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's really important to us, and I don't think we're unique relative to other large companies that have embraced the promise of plugging into a Silicon Valley ecosystem. We've acknowledged that it's extremely important for us to keep a foot firmly planted in today and a foot planted in tomorrow. But the two are closely interlinked because some of the things that we learned as we explore how to become a mobility company, for example, as we look at alternative ways for accessing cars with a card paid by the hour car usage program, we launched a service that we call GoDrive that allows you to rent a car by the hour. You pay with either a smartphone or a RFID card, and you drive the car as long as you want it, and when you're done, you park it and you go on your way. And people love it. It's a really wonderful pilot. But one of the things we've learned, and we can learn from that, is we can collect some of the data from those experiences, do analytics on it, and use that to make our products better. And so the core business will benefit as you explore alternatives and new opportunities in the future of mobility. But we keep a foot firmly planted in today because you have to. And how you do that work gets influenced by things you learn as you explore and create new opportunities as you plug into a Silicon Valley technology.
And I mean, and Jim from Visa, where you have, so the flip side of it being really lean and really big, but also really virtual and really digital is the usual line is very, very low barriers to entry when it's software and digital, right? So you've got this massive franchise, but it's not like it takes billions of dollars to build up a new payment system. There's trust and there's verification and those things. So how do you look at innovation in the sense of, do you feel that you are in a more disruptible space that's more tenuous, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between the technology part of the stack and then the business commercial part of the stack that people oftentimes play through. And there's an assumption that because the internet flattened the world, the Visa started, as I mentioned, as connecting the banks historically through a centralized, effectively IBM mainframe system network architecture system that grew over time. And luckily, again, we got lucky, just like a lot of companies do. We were born at the same time that Thomas Watson Jr. convinced Sr. that computers would be big. And so we grew up in a lot of ways with the scale that came through that system. Clearly, we live in a world today with distributed and decentralized architectures. And I would argue, as I think Dee Hock has actually said publicly, that if they were building VisaNet today, we'd probably be a very different architecture because the choices are different. And certainly, the internet has flattened the world. That said, we haven't seen massive disruption. Actually, as I mentioned before, now that we've opened the edge of our network, we're actually seeing people come to us predominantly because of the commercial model, not the technology stack. I mean, I've had some really silly conversations, silly from our perspective because we were silly, when we engaged technology companies about how we wanted to connect to them with big fat pipes, and they're like, what are you talking about? You haven't heard of the internet? And so we had a little bit of an internal cultural debate about how you can scale in this new world. That said, we're still attractive because with 14,000 clients hanging off of us that give us access to over 2 billion consumers, 40 million merchants in commerce, the vast majority of the people that come to us don't want to recreate that. They want to connect to it. And then it becomes an issue of how flexible are you with respect to the commercial edge as opposed to the technology stack.
Interesting. And then, I mean, for the Fidelity has different dynamics as a private company. And if you think about Michael Dell taking himself public, I mean, he took his company public with a lot of other people's money, but as a shorthand, taking himself private from being a public company. Partly because the dictates of markets and how you spend and what your business vision are. Public markets may not agree that your business vision is a business vision that deserves X valuation, right? Private company doesn't have to answer to that. Do you find that it's a more fruitful place for the kind of innovation or kind of new business, or does it come with its own issues? I mean,
Well,
of course it comes with its own issues.
Yeah,
but
I
would
think,
you like to
I
talk
mean,
about
and,
it?
Marco talked about pace. So if we, go back 20 years, so commercial internet comes out, 1995, Fidelity, largely thought of as phone-based mutual fund company, probably, if you had to shorthand it. Launch Fidelity.com, go heavily into the brokerage business, and 5 years later, 97% of transactions are online, 90% of customer interactions. So I think the ability to really, again, that mission focus, how do we best serve customers? What is a channel? What is a set of products that's best going to serve their needs? Mutual funds are still important. The phones still matter. People still want to talk to someone in a live setting. But at the same time, how do you nimbly kind of pivot to where people are going with still delivering what they want from you today? And so I think the advantage that potentially a private company might have in that is just being able to make that pretty quick move. And not to say that public companies can't do that, but I think in our case, it's always been the mission is first. How do we serve customers well? How do we help have great outcomes? The products and the channels, those evolve over time. And so if we had this conversation 5 years ago, it was all about mobile apps, and it's going to change, and it's going to change. But what remains the same is the mission.
So one last question, then we'll do some audience questions. Is there a danger, and maybe this is not true in any of your companies, but sometimes innovation gets segmented as a function, right? And then everybody else is doing their thing. And so rather than the idea of every single aspect of the business you're in, changing, evolving, innovating, how much do you feel in each of your companies is this a principle embedded in every operating line versus or we're in the innovation portion of the company?
Well, I'll start because I think at Ford it's pretty straightforward because it comes from the top. And when you have a crystal clear, unambiguous message from the CEO that there is a focus and an imperative on innovating in every part of the business, you can't misinterpret that. Every talk he gives internally at the company, he emphasizes our plan and our focus, which is accelerating our One Ford plan and delivering products with passion and innovating in every part of the business. And so when I get called sometimes incorrectly, sort of Ford's chief of innovation, I always correct people because everyone's job is to drive innovation.
It's important.
And
point.
my job is to be the vice president of research, which is an enabler of innovation that everyone has access to. So for us, it's a pretty clear, unambiguous from the top message.
Quickly, you want to?
So for us, it's part of the culture. So innovation has been at the heart of the GE culture. So the idea that everything is about innovation has always been there. That's not the challenge. The challenge we're addressing now is the change in the nature of innovation, realizing that you should no longer think in terms of the next generation of industrial hardware, but the next generation of industrial hardware and software, because the two are intertwined. And that's the new challenge. But otherwise, it's part of the culture.
Questions? Someone over here, Mike, and then we'll go over there. And please, the obligatory, tell us who you are.
Hi, my name's Dan Shine. My organization is the Innovation Hangar, which is a collision between entrepreneurs, investors, students, and the public. In listening today, there's been a lot of discussion about very savvy, strategic ways to leverage the resources of the Valley. But I would like to hear maybe from each one of you at least one sort of example of how you're actually giving back to Silicon Valley. What are you doing, whether it's education or whether it's job creation? We have Cisco in our space as an example that's created a vocational training facility. You're taking a lot of things out of the Valley and out of California back and you're applying them, but what's your contribution to being part of the ecosystem?
Well, there's the hotel prices here.
But
They probably took Uber from the airport.
But see, on this one, actually, it's a very good point. And for us, we have a GE Ventures operation, which is in Menlo Park, where what we do is it's a venture capital, so there is financing, but we also give access to some of the GE resources from HR expertise, legal expertise, systems expertise. I do some of it by bringing my expertise to small startups on what's happening around the world. So this is one way in which we try to bring some of the resources of a large company and give back to the Silicon Valley community.
Yeah, and we're doing something very similar. When we opened our lab in Palo Alto, it was important that lab be a member of Silicon Valley. And I use those words intentionally because we didn't want it viewed as an outpost where we come and kind of gobble up some technology and then fly home to Dearborn. We wanted to be part of the community, and I think we've been successful at that. And, so the two gentlemen that are sitting on your same couch there, they're leading that lab, and they are part of the community. We hold technical seminars. We interact with Stanford and with Berkeley and with other technology companies in the Bay. We hire people from other institutions coming out of research organizations and out of the universities. So being part of the Valley means you live here, and it means that you're investing in the talent that's in this area, and you are part of the special element that makes this place pretty unique.
And Fidelity manages all the pensions and the 401k plans, and Visa makes it possible for everyone to live their lives daily. Ma'am.
Hi, Elin Elkjag. I'm from Sweden, but I'm building an IoT company here in San Francisco. I'm actually going back to the title, Beyond Silicon Valley. Where besides Silicon Valley do you see innovation come from in your companies, and what regions or cities do you not see as a threat, but where do you see other parts of the world innovating that you are looking into?
Just I'll throw out one. So I think when you think about purchase, the vast majority of Visa's business is retail POS volume, which is a merchant pull. So we all give our credentials to merchants, and effectively then they ask our banks to say, are you who you are, and do you have an open to buy? In a big part, the world's going to start to change. You've seen it here in the Valley with Square Cash and Facebook Messenger doing P2P, but that business actually started in a large way in emerging markets, namely large parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where consumers do push payments. Our network actually works both ways, but we never really thought about it in those terms. And so we actually see a big wave coming where you'll see around the world, some markets are already there, but push payments where I authenticate to my account and actually push the funds that are good funds to merchants on the other side. And that's coming a large degree from emerging markets.
So on the industrial side, I see it in two different areas. One is advanced economies, many of them in Europe, Israel, and some in the emerging markets, China, India, to some extent Brazil, areas of sub-Saharan Africa. And you see the different forces driving innovation. You also see the advantage of Silicon Valley, though, because you realize that Silicon Valley has this unique combination of the ecosystem, the access to knowledge, the access to financing, and a system which has flexible and solid institutional rules. And you see that in other areas, the innovation happens. In some cases, it's spurred by the lack of some of these features. But in many cases, it is held back. So you realize the potential is enormous. There's a lot going on. But you also realize what the advantage of Silicon Valley is.
And if I could just add one thing, because I don't think they'd let me back in the state, if I didn't say that there's a lot of really great innovation going on in Detroit. And I know that may make you giggle, right? But there's a real revival going on, and you're seeing some startup companies emerge that are a smaller version of the reflection of what's going on here in the Valley. But then, just like GE and Fidelity, and I suspect Visa as well, we're seeing global innovation happen everywhere. We've got a research lab in Germany. We work in China. We've got an IT lab in India. We've done some scouting in Israel. So we're seeing innovation everywhere, and we look for ideas all over the globe.
Hey, David, you might want to think about a conference in Detroit for Techonomy. Yeah. I mean, anyway, just an idea came up from
3 years ago.
The stage here. Sir?
Oops.
And then we'll go.
Tino Mantell, I'm president of the Technology Association of Georgia, so I'm going to push you guys as well because the theme is beyond the Silicon Valley. When you think about just in America, I'm glad you mentioned Detroit, Ken, but Atlanta has 20,000 technology companies. Georgia Tech's there, the busiest airport in the world. Of course, GE has a presence there. Porsche, GM, Mercedes just moved their headquarters there. So push you a bit more about how do you look in the U.S. in terms of where the talent is, and how do you, because today, Marco, you're saying, California is where it's at. Silicon Valley has the leadership role in a lot of these things. But if you look out 5-10 years from now, where are the other pockets in the U.S. if we're going to build jobs in the U.S. if we're going to keep the talent here, if we're going to keep the jobs here? How do you guys look at that?
It's a longer discussion. The talents, clearly, we have areas of research and technical excellence, and we find talent in Atlanta, in Houston, in the New York area, in the Chicago area, in Boston. So there are a number of areas across the country where the talent is there, the infrastructure is there, and research and development innovation is happening. Going forward, the talent that you pointed out is going to be essential. So we need to invest on training, education, skills to make sure that the human capital is there and distributed throughout the country.
We are at our time. Thank you so much, Marco, Jim, Sean, Ken. That was great. And we look forward to the rest of the day, David.